Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being here for our third Mission Formation Workshop. I'm grateful to Suzanne for the time and energy that you've put into this and meeting and really discerning what we can offer our community today. And so we'll just root ourselves for a second, become present, body, mind, and spirit, taking a deep breath and arriving here, letting go of what we came from and what we will go to be fully present to the wisdom that's promised here. And we root in our mission statement, Chestnut Hill College, an inclusive Catholic community rooted in and animated by the mission of the Sisters of St. Joseph, is committed to transformative, holistic education, just relationships, innovative thinking, and responsible action toward a more unified global society and sustainable earth. We talk about transformative and holistic. I have copies of the Sisters of St. Joseph publication, One With, which includes a bunch of stories at this week. It was just published and dropped off about transformation, about sisters who are committed to change and that internal work that from a personal standpoint was rooted in me when I was educated by the sisters at Mount St. Joseph Academy down the street. This slide is from Sister Jean Larch from our mission orientation back in August, rooting ourselves with women who have been bridge builders and lace makers and women of rock and fire. Just want to share two brief stories. So transformation, for me, I learned this when I was 15. Sister Michelle Lesher brought me for the first time to St. Francis Inn. In a special way, we're holding Sister Michelle in thought and prayer today as she defends her dissertation. That was the first time in my life that I looked into the eyes of a person and said, that's what they mean by the face of Christ. That's what they mean. It took me to going to St. Francis Inn and connecting with a gentleman who the two of us probably had more differences in our life. And sitting with him and being with him, and I vividly remember being 15 and looking in his eyes and saying, this is what it means to talk about the living God and the Christ in our midst. And so it was a very transformative place and moment for me. And we're excited in February to begin bringing our students back there. And a whole moment, I was thinking, what could convey holistic from my education with the Sisters of St. Joseph? When I was a senior at the Mount, Sister Mary Dacey approached me and three friends and said, can you teach me a hip hop dance to J-Lo's Get Right? And so we hid after school for weeks in the gym with mirrors up, teaching Sister Mary Dacey a hip hop dance and performing that at the celebration. And there was so much joy in that experience of laughter and movement that I think it was then at 18 that I realized what they meant by this mind-body-spirit relationship, that the joy of the gospel actually is in real relationship, and the joy of the gospel is felt and moved in our bodies with one another. So those two memories for me, I just wanted to begin with and help you think about what has been transformative or holistic in your experience of education. Let me root us. So let's take a moment. And this is a prayer that we used at the beginning in August, so we'll revisit it together. Oh God, thank you for calling together 6 women over 350 years ago. 6 women who still serve as our founders today. Thank you for calling together women and men in our day to serve as examples for us and calling us to be examples too. Examples of suffering with the poor, of learning from those we serve, of putting everything into life, of stepping into new places and uncovering the face of God. O God, teach us to imitate not their actions, but their desire to seek and to share your presence, their desire to respond to a world in need, their desire to love their students, sisters, and brothers, their dear neighbors. And as we open our desires to your call, lead us and guide us in your grace. We offer our thanks and ask our prayer in the name of Jesus, who lives now, within us now and forever. Amen. Okay. So thank you, Suzanne, for the way you will root us and help us to imagine the way forward.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for that introduction to the work that we're going to be doing today. And that is not a typo. I meant mindful, just in case everybody's looking at that saying, uh-oh, she doesn't know she's got a typo up there. I think I'll begin by just saying thank you for inviting me to talk about how the mission lives and breathes in everything that we do at the college. And also to say how sort of honored and in a lot of ways completely unprepared I was for this invitation. The way that it occurred was, some of you know Humanities is repurposing the art studio so that it's a combined study, reflection space, but also space for art classes. And I was working in the art studio over the summer, and Jackie just came by to see how it was going. And she said, "Why are you doing this?" And, and I just, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of stuff came out. Things that I'd been thinking for the past 3 to 5 years that I don't know that I'd even said out loud to anybody else. But whatever I said, Jackie said, "Would you be willing to be a part of this ongoing mission orientation in the fall?" And I said, yes. And then I got really scared because I couldn't remember all the things I said to her. So all to say that, that this presentation is sort of an authentic piece of a personal journey that I've been on for the past 3 to 5 years that began in part because as I kept coming to work, I didn't see college as I remembered college, even at the beginning of my career or when I was a student in college. Things seemed to be shifting. And I just started to read a lot and think a lot about that. And these are the thoughts and the things that I've been thinking about. So the mindful is that, of course, we're in the business of filling minds, but I think we maybe need to be a bit more mindful about how we do that. So always it's helpful to start with definitions. So I thought I would talk about transformative, which we know is causing a marked change in someone or something. And it's that part of our job, especially as faculty, that feels sacred, that feels like a vocation, because you're walking with or guiding students as they trust you to help them on a journey from wherever they are to wherever they hope to be. And so it feels like very serious, sacred work to help people move through transformation. Holistic, of course, is characterized by the beliefs of the parts of something are interconnected and can only be explained by reference to the whole. And in the Catholic tradition, we are really excellent at that. We have always understood that we minister not just to the mind, but to the body and the spirit. We've always reflected that in our approaches to education. So that's a strong suit for us, but today I'm going to suggest that we have to extend that. And what I mean by extend it is that we have to think a little bit more deliberately about the particular student in front of us, that particular mind, that particular body, that particular spirit. You don't minister to them all or teach them all in the same way, and our students are crying out to be seen in their individuality and their particularity. So that's what I mean by holistic. Now, the education piece, the process of imparting or acquiring knowledge, developing the powers of reason and judgment, and generally preparing oneself or others for intellectually mature life. I will say that the gavel was not my choice. Microsoft Office or PowerPoint put the gavel. I don't see education as particularly legislative or judicial, but that's the image I got, and I couldn't figure out how to change it. So, but we see a lot of with the word intellectual, we see the cognitive effort of education. With mature, we get that indication of transformation. But the part of this definition that I hold dear, and by dear I mean it confuses me, is the process of imparting or acquiring. Because the imparting part is the education part. It's the teacher, her materials, her expertise. The acquiring part is the student part, where they have been, who they are as they come into that classroom, what their experiences with prior learning are, and how comfortable they feel in that environment. And so that's the push and pull of the moment of learning and education. And that's where I think the magic happens, right? Somewhere, who's responsible exactly for this learning? The student and the faculty. And somewhere we get traction in that space of magic between what we deliver and how they take it on board. And it was exactly there that I started to struggle about 5 years ago. All of a sudden, things that I had done my entire career didn't seem to be working as well. And I couldn't feel the magic in the same way. And it really took me on a journey to think about what happens in that space. So I recognize, you guys know who that is, right? Henry Higgins and Eliza Doolittle, Julie Andrews, though, not Audrey Hepburn. But, and that's I get it. It's a very politically and socially charged example of transformation. But it's a well-known image of transformation, as Henry Higgins takes Eliza Doolittle and he turns her from a crude flower girl to somebody who can be comfortable in high society. But he, of course, learns a thing or two in the process as well. But the problematic image aside, I just thought I would begin with a reflection. So there are two pieces to this reflection, and if you could take about 2 or 3 minutes to recall a transformative educational experience you've had and try to identify what made it transformative for you. Does anybody have an experience they'd be willing to share with us? Now consider a transformative educational you feel you offer to our students, and what makes it transformational. What is the piece of it that you see as the magic that helps a student transform? So today, I was thinking a little bit about, what do we think about when we think about transformation in higher ed? And we usually think about our students. How are we going to transform them, help them become something, different and hopefully better and more complex on the other side of the educational experience? But today, I really wanted to focus on how we, and I mean the institution and then each of us personally, might need to think about how we go about our work, how we might transform. And what does the work of offering transformational experiences look like now? So here's the spoiler alert. So often what I hear is that we have a structure to this higher educational system, and what we need to do is support students with perceived deficiencies or remedializations, and we just have to add support to them, the right kind of support, a lot of support, and then they can fit in to our structure. And what I am suggesting today is that maybe this is a little bit more of a two-way dialogue than we've previously recognized, and that maybe there are some elements of the institution that need to change to meet the students that we have. This is not a one-way street. So this is what I think about when I think about there is this yawning gap. Now I know I've been teaching for 25 years now. This is my first graduate class was when I was 25. So I've been teaching for 25 years now. And I don't think this gap is just generational. I'm feeling it and I hear it in my colleagues. We talk to each other about the symptoms that we see in the classroom with the students. They don't take notes. They're not paying attention. They're on their phones. They don't seem to be motivated to learn. And when I hear all of those things, I feel myself too, this yawning gap between me and them, and I'm trying to figure out what exactly is happening. And when I started to think about what exactly was happening, I realized that in the 25 years that I've been teaching, we have had a complete revolution in the way that we live. 50 years ago, Tuesday, I think, or Monday, was the anniversary of the development of the microchip. That was the thing that made personal computing possible. It took about another 20 years, but they got small enough so that we all have little mini computers in our pockets. And even people who didn't grow up with the mini computers have registered and understood that they feel sort of psychically, emotionally, and intellectually changed by their presence. You know, those pings that actually fire dopamine in our brains, the fact that Nicholas Carr reports that despite being an avid reader since the advent of his cell phone or mini computer in his pocket, he has a hard time sustaining focus longer than he used to. And now imagine the fact that our students have just grown up with this. This is their set point, not a change, not a modification, but their set point. And when I think about that, I think about how knowledge changes and their relationship to knowledge changes. And I want to correct my word a little bit and refine it. Students, I think, are confusing information with knowledge. And information is imminently retrievable at any moment using the cell phone. And so they can look up anything they want pretty quickly. And so, the kind of education that at least I had, memorize these dates, these kings, these queens, these important figures in American history, it doesn't get traction with them in the same way because they're like, I can just look this up. I'll just look this up later. But what they don't realize is, and this is the thing that I think this is one of the set points that I think we need to start talking to them about, is that information without context is meaningless. And it flies right in your head and right out of your head. And what you really need, what knowledge really is like a little net in your head so that you can contextualize the information that you're hearing. You have to know things to put them in relationship to other things. And so really talking to students about the difference between retrieving information and understanding that information has to have something to grab onto in your brain, that's the difference between just looking up your information and becoming a knowledgeable person with frames of reference for new information. So that's one. Then we had the recession of 2008. And as a humanities person, this is my scary space because all of our majors started to plummet. And there's an ongoing survey at the University of California, Los Angeles, that always surveys their first-year class. And every year since 2008, the number one reason those students are going to school is to get a job. Every single year. And we've seen some changes to the institutions, all institutions, as a result of it, a proliferation of pre-professional majors. We've really been trying to speak to them in the language and allay their anxieties. But, this idea that they want a career, if you talk to them about what they're looking for there in terms of the education experience, it isn't just necessarily a pre-professional degree, but they want all of their experiences, even in the liberal arts, to speak to career readiness and how they can, use the things they're learning in a liberal arts degree to find jobs. And on top of that, they say things that the classroom has to change. They want more experiential and immersive experiences that allow them to practice what they're learning in real world scenarios. So that was another big event. So we were digital revolution, recession of 2008. And as if all that weren't enough in any time, that would be plenty to take on board in a 20-year span. We have the sucker punch of the last 2 years with COVID-19. And the things about COVID-19, if students were already questioning the value of a traditional liberal arts education because they weren't sure how it got them ready for a job in a financially strained economy, they are really in a position of reassessment right now. Last year, 2020, fall of 2020, of all the high school graduates that could have gone to college, only 62.7% of them wound up attending college. That is the lowest number in 20 years. They are clearly in a step back and pause moment where they're trying to figure out what college is and what it's going to offer them. In addition to that, what they want from college is changing. In a recent poll by the Chronicle of Higher Education, they found that Gen Zers, post-COVID Gen Zers in particular, report wanting wellness, safety, and inclusion as much as they want academic rigor from their institutions. Now, that's good news for us because we do that. And so we need to know that we do that and put that forward for them. But so it's not just about their reassessing what they even want from higher education is changing. And then I would say that's all before we get into the impact on their learning styles, the fact that their preparedness, and both the particularized and general trauma of coming off the past few years. So if we were under some degree of scrutiny, even before COVID-19, where people were asking about the cost and value of higher education, and particularly the liberal arts degree, and especially the humanities, if we were under pressure, we are really under pressure now. Here's the proposition. It's very simple. Why are we worth their time and their money? And here's the thing about that. We used to have ways of answering it. Ready? Here's the job response. If you get a college education in the course of your lifetime, you will make roughly $1 million more than somebody who doesn't have one. Okay, but everybody says that. Everybody knows that. They've known it for a long time. That's no longer a really persuasive talking point in and of itself. It's not particular enough. We also say things, and this is not to say these aren't important or not true, but we say things about small class size, small faculty to student ratio. But similarly, these messages are too generic. They're not particular enough. We're not saying what we here at Chestnut Hill College are going to be able to give students that make us different from the other schools with their low faculty to student ratios and small class sizes. The messaging has to be much more particular. And I feel a little bit like this, that we have two worlds colliding. And on one hand, we've just always believed knowledge is power. It's Francis Bacon, right? But Michel Foucault challenged us to understand that both knowledge and power are constructed, they're enforced and controlled, and who's controlling them, enforcing them, and who gets to rebel against them are the questions we need to be thinking about and answering for ourselves. So I'm gonna give a kind of contentious example. I don't know how long ago it was, but at some point we started talking about higher education as a consumer model. And every higher ed professional I knew pushed that away. No way. I'm the expert, I'm the gatekeeper, they have to meet my standards. They don't buy these degrees. That's a ridiculous idea. This degree isn't for sale. Okay, that's true. That's hopefully true. That's fine. But I'm going to compare this to the world of medicine. As a lot of you know, my dad's a CMO, and he was a general practitioner for over 50 years. So he watched the field of medicine change, and the field of medicine is about 10 years ahead of us, because they are also a service industry where they have a series of experts who have to deal with a general population in a way where they're trying to impart something important to them. But my dad now, for example, one of his areas of responsibility is patient satisfaction. And I don't even think that ever occurred to anybody even to ask about patient satisfaction 15 years ago. So why? Because what they realized was that their experts who were busy and very knowledgeable were walking into rooms, meeting people, putting them in boxes, diagnosing them, and leaving the room, and the patient did not feel cared for. The patient may have survived, but the patient didn't feel cared for. And in some cases, there were misdiagnoses because they weren't looking at the particular patient. Maybe their ethnic background made them less likely to want to share a particular detail of their health with this particular doctor. And so they were also making mistakes. And so what we started to see in medicine was a shift that, yes, I'm the expert, but I am also the collaborator with you in your health journey. And that what I need to do is bring my expertise to bear on your situation. But in order to understand your situation, I have to listen to you. Not just look at you and put my stethoscope on you, but listen to you and observe you and know what your cultural situation and background is so that I can more accurately and more compassionately deal with you and make you well in a way that feels respectful and as if you've been treated with dignity when you're in my presence. So I would say, as much as we've been kicking back against the consumer model in higher education, there is a glimmer of something on offer there. And that glimmer is that we do have to see our students more particularly than we have. They don't just walk in like a uniform bunch of 18-year-olds that we then push out on the other side as 21-year-olds. They come to us with very particular histories, sometimes of systemic violence, having experienced tremendous trauma in their lives, suffering from mental illness, having a whole host of things that they bring with them into our classrooms. And we can't just afford to stand up there as the experts and treat them all uniformly the same. That is not care, and that is not meaningful teaching and learning. If we're going to be truly holistic, we have to invest and dig down, just like the doctors have had to minister to the full patient. But that doesn't just mean body, mind, and soul. It means the particularities of their existence. So here's a classroom simulation. This is where I'm going to pretend to be a professor on the first day of class with you. And I'm going to walk in, and I might clamp my feet. And I'll say, welcome, class, to the future of higher education. So nice to be with you today. I'd like to start our class together with a quiz. Do you have an index card and a pen? I put them on your desk for you. You have one? Yes, okay. I need you to use that index card and that pen, and I'm going to time you for 30 seconds to answer. I got to get my timer ready because it's more powerful actually if it beeps. If it doesn't beep, it doesn't have the same effect, right? So let me do timer. So I'm going to put a timer on for 30 seconds, and I would like you to answer this question on your own. No talking to each other, please. Timer's on. And I'm actually only going to give you 15 seconds because it's a simulation, and 30 seconds is actually really long. So we'll go with 15.
Is it a trick question?
Can't tell you. Okay. And I put it on for 30 minutes, but imagine beep, 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 beep. I didn't use my own timer correctly, but anyway. Okay, so now I say to you, if you are 100% sure of the answer on your index card, you can hand it to me right now, and you will get an A, if you're right, for the entire semester. Who wants to hand in their card? It makes you really uncomfortable, right? Like, yeah, okay. If you hand it in and it's wrong, you get an F. Class over for you. Who wants a little bit more time to talk to other people and maybe consult their computers or their phones? Would you do that? Okay, now you just have to take the course as usual, though. Okay, I'm going to stop the assessment there, and I'm going to tell you, this is Kathy Davidson's assessment. She used it in a class on the future of higher ed. The point is, this is everything that's wrong with traditional models of education. I walk in, and rather than really welcoming you, I pro forma welcome you, and I give you a high stakes assessment as the very first thing that I do when I meet you. I encourage you to believe that it has a simple answer and that you can be clearly right or clearly wrong. And then after that, I do offer you an opportunity to do something you're not usually allowed to do in the classroom. Pull out your cell phone and look it up. And if you did look it up, you would realize that Gutenberg is not exactly the right answer, right? So that movable type, block wooden movable type, was actually pioneered in the Tang Dynasty of China in 856. And so that, yes, Gutenberg also, now we get to welcome into cultural relativity and which versions of history we like to put forward to celebrate certain ideas about ourselves and our work and the importance of Western culture. And all of this revolved around a broadcast model of teaching where I get up here and I just start talking to you. Okay, this is where that came from. That's a wonderful picture by Tetsuya Ishida, by the way. He's a Japanese artist. So this is the industrial model of higher education that was pioneered by Charles Eliot, who was president of Harvard from 1869 to 1909. And what's really interesting, because we're about to show the limitations of everything he put in place. So let me say something nice about him first, because he truly was a pioneer. He attended Harvard at a time when the entrance exam included translating things from English to ancient Greek and Latin, and Harvard was still primarily a seminary, and they studied the Bible as well as some liberal arts areas. And when he got out of school, it was fine. You know, his family was quite wealthy. He took a very low-paying job as a tutor at Harvard. They didn't pay very well, but didn't matter. He had money. And then all of a sudden, the panic of 1857 happened. And in financial institution after financial institution crumbled, including Charles Eliot's family's wealth. And all of a sudden, he had a quarter-life crisis and said, I've got to work. What am I going to do? And when he realized that he had to work, he actually reflected that his Harvard education had prepared him for the past, not the present, and certainly not the future. And he got a bee in his bonnet. He did go to work at MIT. He was, as a sort of version of a chemist at the time. And he made a lot more money there because it was a land-grant institution. Then it was one of the only two private land-grant institutions, MIT and Cornell. So he made decent money. But then he went on a trip to Europe. He saved up money and he started studying universities. And when he came back, he wrote in the Atlantic, it was the Atlantic Monthly at the time, a sort of tirade or a tome called The New Education, in which he said we needed to change higher education entirely. We weren't preparing most people to become pastors anymore. We lived in an industrial corporate world, and we needed to train people to be industrial corporate leaders. And we needed to change the curriculum in higher education. And on that platform, not without serious opposition, but on that platform, he became the president of Harvard for 40 years. Now, what's interesting about his theories is that so much of what he was able to innovate, and this is pretty much the model of higher ed that we still mostly live with, but so much of what he was able to innovate was influenced by the work of people like Frederick Winslow Taylor, who was working on assembly lines to maximize efficiency and timed movement and get things through as fast as possible, and some of the other sort of sensibilities of the industrial age. And so when we think about some of the things that we have as part of higher education and part of what we value, we have things like connected to standardization and timed delivery of knowledge. You must measure up, but you have to measure up in a very specific amount of time. You better be able to do this with the timer on, right? Think about standardized tests. It was also connected to notions of giftedness and also learning disabilities, because now what you have is, if you can't do it in the timer period, you're not as smart. Well, we know that that's not true, right? So I'll use the example of chess players. In traditional chess, if you play traditional chess and you look at the world rankings, there are a certain set of people that always win at traditional chess. But there's a fascinating online community of speed chess players. And when you see the speed chess players, very serious, all globally competitive, it's a totally different set of names. And why? Because the skills you need to play the traditional chess game with a much longer period of time to look at the board are totally different than the skills you need to play speed chess. You process the board differently, and different people's excellences rise to the top. We also know that this is connected to things like the credit hour, which, come on, we know this, right? And then eventually the contact hour. And this, I think, is one of those moments where we and our students really have a moment, because it's sort of like, well, you will learn something if you sit in that seat for this amount of time. And you kind of have to, because it's mandated by the state. So you're going to learn something. And I actually have students who I really think that they believe that just showing up to class is enough, that that is what they're doing. And that is, I'm here. It comes in like osmosis. And I keep trying to tell them that is a misnomer. No, that's only the beginning. That's a baseline. I better get another language then for the hours you need to put in otherwise, because just being here isn't enough. And then, of course, it's a deficit model or a gatekeeping model of higher education, where I am the expert professor who will evaluate you from a standard of excellence backwards to a standard of failure. And that is a model of exclusivity. And it tells students that you either make it or you don't. It's the flunk out course. It's the moment where you're like, you don't have what it takes, right? This is rigor. This is rigor. We used to call it rigor. And all of it is built around this sage on the stage model, that I'm the expert in the classroom. You're lucky to be in my presence. Just listen to me and you will learn, right? None of these things seem to be holding up as well now in the last 25 years, right? When we think about that, we've watched giftedness programs across the nation be dismantled. SATs, many institutions are becoming test optional. What we have started to understand is that this is only one way of measuring intelligence and ability, and it is not, for us, a mission-directed way. It is not inclusive. It is not holistic. So this, if you came to Randy Bass's lecture, if you were here in 2019, which many of you weren't because this is a new mission orientation, I do get that. But we had Randy Bass, who oversees the Red House at Georgetown University. And, oh, do I have a pointer? I think I do, good. Okay, so he's responsible for curricular innovation that runs underneath the standard curriculum at Georgetown. And this is his model for education, and this is where we're going. So disintegrative over to integrative, and from exclusive into inclusive. Traditionally, higher ed lives right here. Remember, some of us will remember this. Look to your left, look to your right. Somebody is not going to be here in 4 years. You're not going to measure up. You're not good enough. It's exclusive and it's selective. And it also contributes to systemic inequality, because schools see themselves as having to be selective to be prestigious. And once they do that, guess who they choose? They choose really good students, because that will make them more selective. But the problem is, we live in a country with one of the most inequitable K through 12 educational experiences in the developed world. So when these schools select the most selective students, they're really selecting the students who could pay for SAT tutors in math, who already went to really good schools in the first place, and who didn't have some of the challenges that other students face. So the move from here, and I'll focus on inclusiveness first, to here, this is social justice in action. This is social justice in action. Being inclusive and saying to students, we'll meet you where you are and we'll help you develop from where you are. That is understanding, I believe, the idea of what true learning is about. Not just exclusivity and flunk out courses, but actually caring about student learning. And so that's the inclusive piece. And the integrative piece is not just about doing interdisciplinary work, although I'm a big fan of that. It's also this piece about the full human being and what they need. And this is, and I am pretty much quoting Randy Bass out of the box here, that we now know cognition is not enough. We know to truly learn, you need metacognition, self-regulation, a growth mindset. You need dispositions like openness, creativity, empathy, resilience, and humility. Or if you want to teach somebody something or have learning happen, this is actually a quote from him, these are not nice to haves, these are must-haves. This is how you help people learn. We don't teach it, right? That's the trick. This isn't your content, but this has to inform your pedagogy while you're delivering your content. And if you don't have the undercurrent of all these things, and this is where I think I was losing my magic. I'm afraid I didn't always have the undercurrent of all of these things. I was maybe too invested in the exclusivity model or, well, you're not measuring up, but really thinking about what these things need, how they inform a classroom experience will help us to teach the students we have to learn. And one of the things, Sister Carol, that we say all the time, right, is that we're not just teaching them the content, we're teaching them how to learn for the rest of their lives. Because no matter how full our curriculum is, we can't teach them everything they need to know, and the world is going to change. So the most important thing we can give them is the ability to learn after they leave us. So with that in mind, how do we put the student in student-centered? I'd like to do a little perspective taking with the students, right? They come to college and they have come from areas sometimes with gun violence, systemic inequality, they have climate change, poverty, all these things are on their minds. And we take them into the classroom, and in my case, we talk about Hemingway. And they're like, is she okay? Does she not know what's going on out there? And it looks like fiddling on the deck of the Titanic to them. Like, we're not talking about some very real problems that we know about Gen Zers. They want to be change agents. They want to help change the world. But we're not talking to them about those things always. I mean, I know some of us are, and we try to, but it's just, I don't mean to generalize, but that's a point that I'd like to make. And then we have to think about how vulnerable they are, economically and socially vulnerable. And that's really important to me, because it would be really easy just to give them a certain kind of pre-professional degree experience that got them into a really decent first job and call it job done. I don't call that job done. I feel we are mission bound not to under-educate these students. All of the deep learning skills about critical thinking and problem solving are as important for them. All the things that the liberal arts curriculum is built around are as important, if not more important for them than for students who are otherwise privileged. And so what do we have to do? We have to help them connect the dots, right? This is how what we're talking about in this classroom connects to the real world problems you're facing. And this is how I understand that you come to me not necessarily valuing what I'm teaching you, but here's why you should. Explaining that. Take the time to explain it. And I'll talk more about this in the Q&A if you want me to, but we know that we need to do, who was it? Somebody back there said, the one doing is the one learning, and that's true. So the highly transformative experiences we now know are high impact, palpable impact. They are applied experiences, experiential experiences, and real world experiences. So a couple of subtle shifts I would encourage. I don't think we should talk about high risk students. That's our language for them. Their experience is that they are high stakes students. Every decision they make, every course they fail, is potentially a devastation for them, a reason that they have to leave the school. So we need to understand, and even, I know it's just semantics, but it helps you perspective take, right? And then we need to understand that standards don't equal standardization, right? That in some way, we have to have standards, absolutely. Nobody's saying don't have standards, but they're not all going to meet them at the same time and in the same way. We have to find ways to help our courses to structure and design our courses so that students can level up at slightly different times and reach different levels of mastery based on where they started. And we certainly have to move away from the broadcast model. You know, what we were saying, the most magical experience is when I learn from them and they learn from me. And it's a true exchange. So last few slides here. We have to design for integrative learning experience. Not just enough to sit here and listen about it. You actually have to think, how does this change my pedagogy in my classroom? How do I design for this experience? And so we know that learning is inherently vulnerable. If somebody's not vulnerable, they're not going to learn. So I call this armor up or open up. And so many of our students, especially first-geners, will come in and they will armor up because it's all so unfamiliar. It just takes their breath away. And so they're looking around. They don't know what a dean is. Oh my God, what's a provost? Thank God we don't call you that, because that's even more confusing than VPAA. But do you know what I mean? Like, they don't know our vocabulary. They don't know how we're structured, how we're organized. And then when they come into the classroom, I'm not always sure that we're taking time to check in with them, that they might be armored up. That they might also, here's a statistic for you, 82% of the professoriate is white. That's important to know, because students tend to be more successful in classrooms with professors that look like them. Now, we can't magically transform ourselves, but we can acknowledge that. We can take a moment to say, you know, what are the dynamics here? How do we work through them? How do I gain your trust? You have to have the clarity of the values. What am I teaching you, and why does it matter? Do you accept and believe that it matters? Then we build trust, and that way they feel safe to fail. Because if they are going to try, the one thing we know for sure is that they're going to fail. So they need rising skills. Failure doesn't become the flunk out course. Failure becomes a discussion about where you are and how you move to the next level and what you need to do that. It doesn't become an all or nothing game. And so I really think we have to remember how powerful our presence is in the classroom and how much damage we can do to students with really harsh grades or with casual remarks about something not being up to par. We just have to be aware that that could cause them to put the armor right back on. And then the learning's over. So what are the real ideas? I know every time people hear a lecture or a discussion like this, they're like, well, how do I do this? So there are so many ways to do this, but I just put up 5, and I'm only going to talk about 2 or 3. You know, Mastery Learning of Model by Benjamin Asplund is one that says, I don't know is a decent starting point. And what you do is you identify the first step. Here's where we want you to get at the end of the semester, and you break it down into step by step by step, and you help the student understand where they are in that progress at any given moment. And it's not necessarily about grades or all or nothing assignments. It's here's where you are in the skill set. Now, I know that sounds a little vague, so I'm going to give you this slide, which is, this is an example of a progressive rubric. I just discovered these this year, and it's changing my life. Rather than talk to them about their grades, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which, by the way, this is exactly what my rubrics look like, and I'm feeling a little, you know, like I have to do something about that. And this is where you are if you have a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or 5. A hyper rubric takes away the inherent assessment and puts it in the language of the student's developing competencies. Beginning, developing, approaching, applying, and extending. And then it makes an act of learning connected to the rubric. The rubric, this is not a final, you're done. You hand it in and I've told you how you did. This is, okay, here's where you are in the measure of understanding character development in this instance. And here's a bunch of links that if you don't understand, if you're still at the beginning, go link and learn these definitions and then apply it to what we're reading. So you build in another layer of learning in the rubric itself. And not every student's going to get to extending, and that's okay. But what you are trying to show them is what the arc is and see how and where they get. And you can identify, depending on the level of the course, which level would be your mastery level, because first years will be at a different level than seniors, right? And so ungrading is a huge umbrella. I'm happy to talk about any of these. I'll just sort of leave them here with you with a couple of final statements. Oops, what did I do? This is the Red House, and that is Brian Alexander, who works with Randy Bass. And the Red House, which is the incubator for innovation at Georgetown, has above its fireplace this sign: yes, a university can reinvent itself. And I'm going to read the quotation above from Nancy Davidson's New Education. Because we have so thoroughly accepted machine-age ways of thinking about education, it's hard to peel back the assumptions and see how historically specific they are. When we do, it is surprising to notice how many of those notions that shape formal education today are really archaic, even odd. And so this talk is meant as an invitation to say, if we know that these are the conditions of learning, but we still have to teach Hemingway, we're still going to teach Shakespeare, but if these are the conditions for transformation to help students learn, how might you incorporate these elements, maybe not all of them, but some of them, into the coursework that you do? How does that look in your classrooms or in your interactions with students? So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Thank you. I'm going to take this slide and bring this into our final gathering together. So everyone in cohort 1 who was a new hire this year will gather in December for reflection. And I think you've just given us the perfect content for us to revisit in December together and claim and talk about which of these conditions we're committing to. So thank you so, so much. Thank you, everyone. If you are able to stay and chat, let's do that. But I know it's 3 o'clock. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Suzanne.